unceded lands and the Anishinaabe and the Ojibwe and the Huron-Wendat and the Mississaugas. And those were societies that cared about each other, perhaps more than ours, and it's important for us to maintain that tradition as we operate on their land. And as you will have noticed, we're not the only people out in the park today. There's some other folks who are demonstrating and have their point of view. So I would just ask you to look at the names of the battle locations on the First World War side and the Second World War side, because the men and women in uniform for this country who fought against the Nazis were fighting exactly for what we see in this park now. The right to express our separate point of views, to differ as part of a strong democracy, and that's something we should not take for granted. So, ladies and gentlemen, as we march today, we have, sadly, the experience of the pandemic, the worst part of which, hopefully, we have just been through. And what the pandemic taught us is that there really wasn't one pandemic, there were two pandemics. One for those people who were better off, and one for those who live beneath the poverty line. And the level of infection and death amongst the second group was way higher than it was for the rest of the population. And that is because, as we all know, as supporters of basic income, poverty is the best predictor of bad health outcomes, bad education outcomes for the kids, difficulties with the law, and frankly, shorter lives. And I don't recall, I've been involved in politics for some 40 years, I don't recall any political party having a meeting where they decided that poor people really should die first. I don't recall that being a party policy. But the lack of action on basic income, the fact that if you're a low-income person, you tumble into poverty, or you find yourself growing up in poverty, the fact that all you have available to you are old-fashioned, clunky welfare programs that are full of rules and do not, in fact, lift people out of poverty, but actually trap people in poverty. Those programs discourage work, they discourage creativity, and they have folks in various civil services across the country telling low-income people how they have to live their lives. Well, the country I believe in is one where all citizens get to make their own choices about their lives, and we work together to make sure that those who are in poverty get a hand up and a chance to build their way going forward. And that is not what our present programs do. One of the great things about basic income is that it encourages people to work. During the pandemic, a lot of the people who got sick were the people who worked as low-income, working poor employees in the long-term care homes right across this province. And they had to work in more than one long-term care home to make enough money to even get by. And as they went from one place to the other, they became innocent vectors of the virus. And let's be clear, they had low pay, they had no benefits, they had no sick leave. So that was a classic example where poverty and the lack of a basic income produced more disease, more death, more suffering than was ever necessary. And if you look at a map, John Tory put out a map of the city of Toronto and where the level of infection was the most serious. Well, guess what? It wasn't in Rosedale, and it wasn't in Forest Hills, and it wasn't in the Annex. It was in the parts of the city where lower income, working class people couldn't work from home, had to go out to work, had to face the infection, and didn't have the health status to begin with because they were in a low income population to be resilient and fight back. And we have to learn from that going forward, the best way to insulate this country from another serious and bad pandemic is to put basic income in place now and reduce the amount of people who are living in poverty. You know, if you look up at the events on that monument, there was a time in this country when we did not have universal health insurance. And there was a time in this country where we didn't have the old age pension. And there was a time in this country when we didn't have the guaranteed income supplement for seniors. And there was a time in this country when we didn't have the healthcare system that is specifically appropriate for young children, or free dental care for children. We didn't have any of those things. The reason we have those things now is because people like you in previous generations fought really hard to make those changes. And that is what we are now doing here. We are fighting really hard to make this change because it's the one weak link in the chain. It's the one thing missing from a system which will promote economic growth, which will promote equality of opportunity, and make sure that all of us, because we live in this country, have equality of opportunity in terms of our future and our life together. So that's what we're fighting for. And let me say this, because you are like the people who fought for those other changes, and you're out here on a lovely Saturday afternoon to do a march for basic income, it's an absolute honor for me to be here with you, to lend you my support, and to tell you we are closer than ever to getting it done. God bless you all.